They say the river don't give back what it takes, but that day, it did. The current was slow, snow melt trailing down from the high ridge, sun breaking through after days of gray, and there it was, his old felt hat, floating soft as breath. Along the bend near Widow's Hollow, Maddie froze. That hat hadn't been seen since the day Coulter went missing 3 winters back. No note, no goodbyes, no body, just a rifle left propped by the fence and the gate swinging in the storm. Maddie was 34 that spring, older in the bones than she looked, and the plains had carved quiet into her voice and grit into her hands. She stepped down the slope, in boots scuffed from years of work, dress flapping against her legs. The river's edge lapped at her hem as she pulled the dripping hat free. Water poured from its brim like tears. She turned it in her hands. The stitching inside the crown was still loose, where she'd mended it once, years ago, when he came back from helping a rancher north of Boulder with a bullet in his side, and nothing but a shrug to explain it. The smell of him was long gone, but she felt him there just the same. That night, she sat by the fire, hat cradled in her lap like it was something sacred. She didn't tell the neighbors, didn't ride into town, just stared at the flames until her eyes burned. Coulter Grady had been a drifter when he first showed up, lean, sun-beaten, always watching more than speaking. Some men came to the west to conquer it. He looked like he'd come to lose himself in it. And Maddie had already lost too much to be afraid of. Another man's quiet. He worked her fences, fixed her windmill, taught her horses to drink from the stream again, after it froze near solid one black winter. Never asked for pay beyond room and board, and a dry place to sleep. She didn't ask his past, and he didn't ask her future. They just were. For 3 full years. Then came that storm. 3 feet of snow, 1 dead steer. And when it cleared, Coulter was gone. She looked. Lord knows she looked. But the land gave no answer. Folks said maybe he'd run. Or died. Or maybe he'd never meant to stay. Now here was his hat. And in the morning, she put it on. Not like some dramatic gesture. Not for show. She just set it on her head, adjusted the brim, and stepped outside to feed the chickens. The land was still. Frost along the barn's edge. The air carried that bite of spring. Trying to remember, it was still March. She didn't cry. Not then. Because what if the river wasn't a thief this time, but a messenger? That night, she opened the chest beneath her bed, letters she never mailed. Buttons she'd sewn back on his shirts. Even a strip of leather he'd twisted into a ring and left on the window when he thought she was asleep. She pulled them out like laying memories one by one on the floor. And that's when she found it. His old journal. She hadn't even known he kept one. The leather cover was stiff, tied with twine, and the first page read, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. But maybe I left something behind worth keeping anyway." Her hand went to the brim of the hat, and for the first time in 3 years, she said his name aloud. Coulter. Outside, the wind howled low across the prairie, like it remembered. The past has a way of floating back when you least expect it, and sometimes it brings the pieces of a heart you thought was lost forever. What do you think was in that journal? And what would you do if something long gone came quietly back into your life? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your heart. She waited until morning to read it. There was something sacred about words left behind by the dead or those believed to be. The journal lay on her lap as the light crept across the floorboards. Her coffee untouched and gone cold. Outside, the chickens stirred, the frost melting slow on the fence posts. But inside, the cabin was as still as a held breath. Her fingers brushed over the rough leather once more before untying the twine and opening the journal to the next page. I wasn't planning to stay. Not anywhere. Not after what happened down in San Miguel. But then, I met her. She didn't ask. And that's how I knew she was different. Maddie stared at the ink. Faded in places, but still legible. He had written about her. There's a steadiness in her. Not the kind that asks for promises or says much out loud, but the kind that keeps things growing even when the land's gone bitter. She fed me before she trusted me. That says something. She pressed the pages closed for a second, heart thudding like thunder under her ribs. Her fingers trembled, just a little, and it wasn't the cold. That winter 3 years ago, he'd taken the horse out toward the ridge to bring back firewood. He was supposed to be back before dusk. He never was. She'd followed his tracks for 2 days before the wind swallowed them. The land never gave him back. Not until now. She opened the journal again, flipping forward carefully. She keeps her sorrows behind her eyes. I see it when she's not looking. There's a photograph in her cupboard. A man and a baby. Never asked. She never offered. Maybe she thinks the ghosts we carry are safer not spoken of. Maybe she's right. Maddie exhaled sharply. That photograph had stayed tucked in that cupboard since her husband died of fever and her infant son 3 weeks after. Years ago. Before Coulter. She thought no one had noticed. But he had. I fixed the north fence today. She said thank you, like it meant something. Funny how folks forget how to say that. Not her. She remembered that day. The sky had been purple with distant lightning, and he'd come in soaking wet, smelling of sweat and pine. She'd handed him a bowl of stew and said thank you without much thought. He'd looked at her like she'd handed him gold. There were pages like that, small entries. Observations, memories she didn't know he'd tucked away, until she got to one that stopped her. If this storm doesn't break soon, I'll have to go. Not because I want to. Because if I don't find that man from San Miguel before he finds me, I'll bring danger to her doorstep. And that's the one thing I won't do. She froze. San Miguel. He'd mentioned it once when he'd been drinking too much whiskey and staring into the fire like it might answer back. He'd killed a man there. Or maybe the man had deserved killing. She didn't know. But Coulter had carried that guilt like it was stitched into his spine. He hadn't left because he was afraid of staying. He'd left because he was afraid for her. A deep ache settled in her chest. For years, she'd believed he'd chosen to disappear. That she hadn't been enough to keep him. But now she saw it clear. He had loved her enough to walk into the storm and never look back. And the hat, why would it show up now? Was it fate? Was it a sign? Or just some strange twist of water and wind? Whatever it was, she wasn't ready to stop asking. Later that afternoon, she rode into town to tell anyone. Just to pass by the old telegraph office. See who'd come and gone lately. On her way, she passed Mrs. Dalton, who stared at the hat like she'd seen a ghost. That looks just like the one Coulter Grady used to wear, the old woman said, peering from her porch rocker. Maddie tipped the brim low, her voice quiet. Maybe it is. 2 days after riding into town, Maddie was back on her porch. The brim of Coulter's hat casting a soft shadow over her eyes as the wind stirred faint traces of dust along the path. The journal was still on her table inside, open to the last page she'd read. She hadn't turned it since. Some things took time to swallow, and this truth that he left not to leave her, but to protect her was the kind that stuck in the chest like a thorn, and bloomed slowly into something like forgiveness. The day was quiet. Spring hadn't fully arrived, but the land was waking. Up crows cawing in the cottonwoods, the creek whispering from the ridge. The kind of day where grief didn't scream, it just hummed under your skin. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. She froze. Nobody knocked out here. They either hollered from the gate or just came around back. And something about the way those knuckles hid the door from it didn't sound like a stranger. Maddie rose, slow, and opened the door. A man stood there, not young. Dusty coat, road-worn boots, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and didn't bother pretending otherwise. He held his hat in one hand and a paper in the other. And when he spoke, his voice was rough but respectful. "Ma'am, you don't know me. Name's Eli Jessup. I was with Coulter at the end." Maddie didn't speak. Her fingers tightened against the doorframe. Breath caught in her throat. She didn't ask what he meant by the end. Her silence said it all. Eli nodded, like he understood. "I tried to write," he said. "But I figured this sort of thing ought to be said face to face." She stepped aside without a word, and he entered, moving like a man who knew how to carry pain without letting it spill. He glanced once at the fire, then at the journal lying open on the table. His face softened. "So you know." "I know he left to protect me," she said quietly. "I didn't before, but I do now." Eli sat slowly in the wooden chair by the hearth, rubbed the brim of his hat like it helped him remember how to speak. "He saved my life," he said simply. "That storm, 3 winters back, he'd tracked a man who'd been following us for days. Said he had unfinished business from San Miguel. Coulter never said much about it, but I figured there was a debt behind those eyes." Maddie listened, stiller than a deer in a thicket. "We thought we'd lost him in the snow," Eli continued. "But he came back for me. Shot rang out when I wasn't looking. Took it in the side, but he didn't stop. Got me to a cave, built a fire, with half-frozen fingers, and patched me up best he could. Said if he didn't make it, I was to come here. Bring this." He handed her the folded paper. She took it with both hands, like it might fall apart if she didn't hold it gently enough. She unfolded it. It was Coulter's handwriting. Simple, honest. "If Eli makes it back, Tell her I wasn't afraid to die. Just afraid she'd never know why I left. That was it. No flourish, no plea. Just a man's truth laid bare. Maddie turned her face slightly, as if watching the fire helped keep the tears from rising too fast. But they came anyway. Eli's voice dropped low. I buried him myself. Ridge north of the old cotton trail. Marked it with stones. He made me promise you'd have the hat, but I lost it in the river after the storm. Figured I'd failed him. Maddie touched the brim on her head. The river brought it back. Eli looked up, eyes narrowing slightly with something like awe. Well, I'll be damned. They sat in silence for a time. The crackle of the fire filling the space between two people who had loved the same man in different ways. Finally, Eli stood. Didn't mean to stir things up. Just owed him this. She stood, too. You didn't stir anything that wasn't already moving. He hesitated. He talked about you. You know. Not often. But when he did, he called you his piece. Her throat closed around that word. She could only nod. Eli tipped his hat. Ride safe, ma'am. You too, Eli. And then he was gone, riding off into the light of the setting sun, leaving behind not just a memory, but the truth. That night, she rode out alone to find the stones he'd left behind. The ridge wasn't marked on any map, just a quiet stretch of land where the cottonwoods grew sparse and the wind carried stories no one had the heart to write down. It took Maddie nearly half a day to reach it through tall grass, still kissed with frost, past the old cotton trail. Eli had mentioned an upper rise where the land flattened beneath a sky too wide to measure. She found the stones near a wind-bent cedar, arranged in a careful oval, weather-worn, but steady, like someone had placed them with reverence, not haste. No name carved, just silence. She dismounted and stood there, one hand resting on her mare's neck, the other tightening round the brim of Coulter's hat. The wind was sharp, biting her cheeks and carrying the scent of sage and old earth. This way you ended. Up, she asked softly, like he might answer if the wind caught it just right. The mare snorted gently behind her as Maddie knelt and touched the stones. They were cold, solid, real, and for the first time since that hat floated into her life. Again, she truly believed that Coulter was gone from this world, but not gone from her. She took the letter from her coat pocket, an old one she'd written months after he disappeared. Never mailed, never burned, just folded and hidden in the hollow of her cupboard. You left without goodbye, and I hated you for it. But not as much as I hated myself for hoping you had a reason. I wear that hate like a shawl most days. But I miss you more than I blame you. I just wish I knew if you thought of me too. She unfolded it slowly, then placed it beneath one of the flatter stones. I know now, she whispered. The wind moved through the cedar branches like a breath. She stayed there as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in oranges and golds. The kind of light Coulter used to say reminded him of home, though he never said where that was. Maybe he hadn't meant a place. Maybe he meant this. As she stood to leave, something caught her eye beneath a crooked root near the base of the cedar. A corner of leather, almost fully buried. She crouched and brushed away the soil. A small pouch, weathered, tied with string. She untied it with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished but still shining at the edges. Inside, a tiny charcoal sketch. Her face, younger, softer, her hair pulled back like she used to wear it before time and sorrow taught her to let it fall loose. On the back of the locket were scratched for words, barely legible. For the life I chose. She clutched it to her chest, tears falling silently. Now, not from grief, but from the strange ache that came with being loved that deeply. Even if too late to say it back. The stars were out by the time she rode home. The sky stretched wide above her like a blanket stitched with memory and forgiveness. She didn't cry again that night. She lit a fire, sat with the journal, the locket, and the hat beside her, and watched the flames until they died down to soft embers. Sometimes peace doesn't come like a sunrise. Sometimes it comes like stones. On a ridge, the next morning dawned slow and gold, warm light spilling over the hills like forgiveness. Maddie rose early, fed the stock, stoked the fire, and boiled coffee over the stove. Same as always. But something in her had shifted, settled. Not everything had healed. Not yet. But the ache had shape now, and the silence in the cabin felt less like absence, more like memory. She wore his hat still. Not as mourning, but as something else. Like part of her had remembered how to carry love, even the broken kind. Midday came quiet. No wind, no clouds, just the sound of hoofbeats. She heard them long before she saw the rider. a steady rhythm down the main road from the hills, slow and unhurried, not the kind of pace a man used if he came with trouble. Maddie stepped onto her porch, one hand resting against the worn post as the figure drew near. He rode a pale chestnut mare, with dust caked up to her knees. His coat was dark, long, and sun-faded at the collar, and in front of him, tucked safely in the saddle, was a child, a boy, couldn't be more than 5. Maddie felt something seize behind her ribs as they came closer. The man was young, late 20s, maybe 30. Brown hair, rough at the edges, and a face that looked too tired for someone his age. But the boy, Lord help her. The boy had his eyes not just the color, that muddy green-brown, like river silt, but the way they watched the world, quiet, cautious, seeing more than a child should. The man pulled up at her gate and tipped his hat. "Ma'am, you Maddie Harrow?" "I am." He glanced down at the child, then back up at her. "Name's Luke Carver. This here's Eli. I was told to bring him to you." Maddie blinked, her fingers gripping the porch rail to steady herself. "To me," Luke nodded. "His mama passed last spring. Name was Bethany Grady." The name struck like a shot in the dark. Doc Grady. Her mouth went dry. "She was Coulter's sister," Luke said gently. "I was with her in her last days. She made me promise. Said if anything ever happened, this boy should find home with the one person Coulter ever trusted." He swung down from the horse, lifting the child with practiced ease. The boy clung to him at first, then looked up at Mattie, at the cabin, at the hat she wore, and then he whispered, voice small but certain, "That's my uncle's hat." The world spun slow around her. Maddie came down the steps, eyes stinging, knees weaker than they should have been. "He told you about me?" she asked, her voice a hush. The boy nodded. "Said you had a fire that never went out, even in the snow." Maddie's hand went to her heart. Cliff set the boy down. He stepped forward, closer to her, not afraid, just watchful. "I don't know much," Luke said. "Just that Coulter wrote to Bethany a few times. Told her about this place. Said if anything ever went wrong, she'd know where to send the boy." Maddie looked at Eliat, the sharp cheekbones, the soft mouth, the old soul eyes, and something inside her cracked open in the warmest way. "Did he ever meet Coulter?" she asked. Luke shook his head. "No. Coulter sent money once in a while, a letter now and then, but he never came back east. Bethany said he was protecting them from something." Maddie closed her eyes. That sounded like him. She crouched to the boy's level, her voice soft. "You hungry?" He nodded. She reached out a hand. "Well then, come on. We'll fix that first." He placed his small fingers in hers. And in that moment, it wasn't grief she felt. It was something like beginning again. Sometimes the past doesn't come back to haunt you, it comes back to hand you a second chance. What would you do if a piece of someone you'd loved came walking back into your life, needing shelter? Would you take them in? Share your thoughts down below. That night, the cabin held more warmth than it had in years. The fire crackled low, throwing soft shadows across the pinewood walls. Maddie moved with quiet purpose in the kitchen, ladling stew into bowls, the scent of onion and thyme filling the air. Luke sat by the hearth, thumbing his hat. The boy curled beside him with a wool blanket over his legs and a quiet look in his eyes. It had been hours since they'd arrived, and not once had the child cried or clung. But he hadn't laughed either. He was watching everything like he was still deciding if this place was going to break his heart the way others had. Maddie set a bowl before him and one for Luke. Then, she placed a third across the table. Her hand hesitated. That seat had stayed empty since Coulter left. She'd never been able to bring herself to use it, even for guests. But now, she slid it out, slow and gentle, and motioned the boy over. "You can sit here, Eli," she said softly. He looked at the seat, then at her, then quiet as dust falling on snow. He climbed in. Luke ate, slow. Maddie barely touched hers. She kept glancing at the boy, unsure how to speak into the ache his presence had stirred. Not pain, something deeper, like the ache of roots reaching for water they forgot they needed. Finally, she asked, "You ever live out on land like this?" Eli shook his head. Spoon paused midair. "Mama didn't like towns, but she liked people close by. Said it was safer." Maddie nodded. "It is, sometimes, and sometimes it's not." The boy studied her. She said Uncle Coulter wasn't bad, just ... tired. Maddie folded her hands in her lap. He carried a lot. Some of it wasn't his to carry. Eli nodded, like he understood, more than a boy his age should. Then he asked, "Are you tired too?" Her throat caught. She looked at him truly, looked at the slight curl in his hair, the way his hands curled around the spoon, the guarded hope in his eyes. And for a moment, she didn't see a boy lost in the world. She saw him, Coulter, not in a haunting way, in a living way. Yes, she said honestly, but not the kind of tired that makes you leave. He looked down into his bowl, then back at her. I don't want to leave. Luke shifted in his chair, finally speaking. I can take him as far as Fort Worth, maybe place him with a family I trust. But Maddie shook her head. No, he said. He stays. Both men, one grown, one barely past toddlerhood, looked at her with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She smiled, small and real. I lost a child once, she said. Long time ago, lost a man but I'm still here, and if Coulter thought this boy belonged with me, then he does. She turned to Eli. You don't have to call me anything you don't want to, but this is your home now, as long as you need it. The boy stared at her for a long moment. Then, he pushed his bowl forward a little and whispered, Can I have seconds? She laughed soft, surprised by it, like it had been waiting years to return. Yes, she said, already reaching for the ladle. You absolutely can. That night, after Luke rode out with promises to write and help if needed, Maddie tucked Eli into Coulter's old bed, sheets warmed by stones from the fire. He asked for no stories. Just looked at her, long and slow. Did he ever smile? Eli asked. All the time, Maddie said, brushing his hair from his forehead, but only with his eyes. Eli nodded, then whispered, I think I got that part. She sat beside him until his breathing slowed, steady as creek water, and for the first time in years, she left the cabin door, UNLATCHED, because not everything that comes through it now is meant to leave. The town of Dry Creek wasn't the kind of place where secrets stayed buried. Even under frost and prairie dust, rumors found their way through floorboards and fence posts like creeping vines. And the sight of Maddie Heroines, the quiet widow with no kin, walking into town with a boy at her side, and Coulter Grady's hat still perched on her head, that stirred folks' tongues quicker than wildfire in a dry canyon. It started at the general store. Old Mrs. Tenner watched them from behind her spectacles, her fingers pausing mid-measure on a bolt of cloth. She squinted hard at the boy, then at Maddie, her voice low but sharp. Well now, don't he look like a Grady? Maddie didn't answer, just held Eli's hand tighter and nodded once. They moved through the aisles in silence, picked up flour, a few beans, new socks too small to have ever belonged to Coulter. When they reached the counter, Mr. Cobb rang them up slower than usual. Here, tell that child's kin to Coulter, he said, like he was asking but already knew. He yours now. Maddie looked him in the eye. He's with me, she said, steady. That's what matters. Cobb nodded, but the air shifted. Less friendly, more curious. The kind of curiosity that pried, without permission, by the time she hitched the wagon and rode back out. Maddie could feel the weight of eyes trailing her like shadows. Eli noticed too. He was quiet the whole way back, hands folded in his lap, face turned toward the wind. Halfway down the trail, he spoke. People don't like me. They don't know you yet, Maddie said gently. And people tend to fear what they don't understand. He looked up. Is that why they didn't like Uncle Coulter? She sighed. Part of it. He didn't give them much to go on. Just worked hard. Kept to himself. That can scare folks more than a loaded gun out here. Eli was quiet again. But later that night, as they sat by the fire, he asked a different question. Will you send me away if the town doesn't like me? Her chest tightened, like something old had broken loose again. She knelt in front of him, her hands resting on his small shoulders. You listen to me, Eli Grady, she said, voice low but firm. You are not a burden, not a mistake. You are not here on trial. This cabin, this land, this life, it's yours now. You're not going anywhere. His lower lip trembled, just enough to betray the storm behind his small face. And then he did something he hadn't done since arriving. He hugged her hard. She held him there, her hands splayed against his back, the scent of firewood in his clothes. The rise and fall of a little chest that had known too much loss too young. But not everyone in Dry Creek was content to leave things be. The next morning, a letter arrived. Folded neat, no return name. Just tucked beneath a jar of preserves. Someone left on the porch. Inside, written in ink to neat, to be friendly, we remember. Coulter Grady. You should too. That boy brings danger. Don't forget what happened in San Miguel. Maddie stood there in the doorway, the morning sun glinting off the locket at her neck, the one she now wore every day. She read the letter twice, then crumpled it and tossed it into the fire. Because memory cuts two ways, and hers remembered Coulter not as a threat, but as the man who'd carried his pain in silence. So no one else had to. And now his boy was here, and she would protect him, whatever it cost. 3 days after the letter arrived, a rider came from the south, dust-covered coat pulled tight against a rising wind, silver glinting on his Chester badge pinned just beneath his collar. Folks in Dry Creek stopped what they were doing the way they always did when Law rode in unannounced. Heads turned, conversations died in the air. The sound of his boots on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office echoed like thunder in a dry canyon by sundown. The whispers had turned into certainty. The man was a marshal from San Miguel, and he was asking for Maddie Harrow. That night, she sat on the porch, oil lamp lit beside her, the boy asleep inside with his head curled against a pillow that once held Coulter's scent. The stars blinked above, steady and distant, and the hat on her head felt heavier than usual. She wasn't afraid, not exactly. She was tired of shadows, so when the knock came, she didn't flinch. The marshal was tall, with hard eyes and a jaw like granite. His coat bore dust from 3 counties, and his holster hung low, like he'd never learned to take it off. But when he spoke, his voice wasn't unkind. "Evening, ma'am. Name's Marshal Avery. Mind if I sit?" Maddie nodded once. "Depends on what you've come for." He removed his hat and sat slow, elbows resting on his knees, like a man carrying something he wasn't proud of. "I've come to talk about Coulter Grady," he said. Maddie didn't blink. "He's dead, I know. I'm not here to arrest a ghost." She waited. Avery looked out toward the dark prairie, the wind brushing through the grass like breath. "San Miguel was dirty," he said. "Not the kind of place you survive by following rules. Your man killed someone there. Name was Elias Brandt. Mean, dangerous. Put 2 men in the ground before Coulter crossed his path." Maddie's voice was quiet. "Coulter never told me names, just that he couldn't stay. He didn't kill out of malice," Avery said. "Brandt had it coming. Trouble is, Brandt had kin. Dangerous kin. Paid off deputies. Made noise in the wrong ears." "And you?" she asked. "I looked the other way," he admitted, "because I knew the truth. But I couldn't stop the wheels from turning. Coulter vanished before they could pin a bounty to his back. Smart man. But it made him a hunted one." She swallowed hard. "Why now?" Avery reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a folded note. Coulter's handwriting. Again. "If this ever finds you, it means I didn't make it out. The boy's name is Eli. He's not mine by blood, but I loved his mama once, before everything broke. If she's gone and I'm gone, he needs a home. I trust Maddie." Maddie stared at the words, her breath catching. Avery's voice gentled. "I ain't here to take the boy. I just needed to know he was safe. Coulter gave me this note years ago. I didn't have the heart to deliver it until I heard word of his death for certain. Took me this long to follow the trail." Silence fell between them. Then Maddie said, "Steady, he's safe. And he's staying here." Avery nodded. "Good. He's all that matters now. San Miguel's ghosts won't reach this far anymore. I made sure of that." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "You ever need anything, send word to Laredo. I owe Coulter more than I can repay." Before he walked off into the darkness, he paused. "Grief carves deep, but love builds things that last longer than fear." Then he was gone, just another shadow swallowed by the prairie. Maddie sat alone for a while, the note warm in her hand. Then she stood, went inside, and placed it in the locket with the sketch. A piece of truth finally home. That night, she didn't bolt the door. Some ghosts, it turns out, bring peace when they are finally faced. It was a quiet morning, one of those where the sun rises soft over the hills, the earth still damp from a light rain, and everything feels hushed, like the land itself is listening. Maddie was shelling beans by the window, the fire warm behind her, and Eli outside chasing chickens. In the damp grass, he'd started to laugh more. Lately, little snorts and half giggles that caught her off guard in the best way. He was still cautious, still quiet in crowds, but around the cabin, around her, he was beginning to bloom. That's when she heard his shout. It wasn't a cry of pain, just a sharp, surprised yelp, followed by silence. The kind of silence that made her heart tighten. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. Eli. He was crouched behind the barn, near the far fence where the ground dipped low and stayed muddy longer than the rest. He didn't look scared, just confused. He held something in his hands. She approached slowly, What have you got? He looked up at her, then back down. In his hands was a small, rust-stained metal box. No, bigger than a book. Dirt still clung to the edges. The lock had long since rusted through. He must have tripped on a corner of it while running. It was under the old tree stump, he said. Something told me to dig. Maddie knelt beside him, heart already stirring. She knew that part of the land. Coulter used to chop wood there. Sometimes, he'd sit on the stump and whittle. Other times, just stare out at the hills, with that look of his like he was holding back a storm. She took the box gently and opened it. Inside, a folded piece of paper, a dried sprig of wild sage, a broken harmonica, and a small carved wooden course no bigger than her thumb dot, and beneath all that a letter, her name written in Coulter's unmistakable scrawl. Maddie. She sat back, hands trembling. Eli scooted closer, eyes wide. You want me to go? He whispered. She shook her head. No. You found it. You should hear it. She unfolded the letter, careful not to tear the paper. The ink had faded in places, but the words were clear. I never was good with goodbyes. Figured if I said it out loud, I'd never leave. And if I never left, I'd put everything I love in danger, including you. So I'm burying this instead, because it's the only way I can speak the things I never got to say. Her breath caught. You saved me, Maddie. Not by doing anything big, just by being steady. By letting me fix things without asking why I needed to. By feeding me, trusting me, loving me, even when I couldn't say it back. She blinked through tears. Eli leaned against her arm gently. I never wanted to disappear. I just wanted to take the fire with me so it wouldn't burn you. But I was wrong. You were always the fire. And I should have stayed. A pause in the letter. Then one last line. If you ever find this, it means some part of me still made it home. Maddie pressed the paper to her chest, eyes closed. The wind stirred around them, brushing her hair back from her face. The scent of sage drifting up from the earth. She looked down at the wooden horse, fingers brushing its worn edges. He carved those when he was nervous. She said softly, used to leave M by the windowsill. I never asked why. I think now, they were little pieces of goodbye, just in case. Eli reached into the box and picked up the harmonica. Do you know how to play it? He asked. I used to, she whispered. And for the first time in years, she did. That night, as the sun set behind the hills, Maddie sat on the porch, the boy at her side, and played a slow, halting tune into the wind, something low and aching, but not sad, more like a prayer, the kind that rose up through the dark and said, I remember, I forgive. I'm still here. Spring came early that year. By April, the cottonwoods had begun to leaf. The frost gave way to dew. And the cabin, once marked by silence and sorrow, now hummed with the sounds of life. Chickens clucked louder, the creek ran faster, and inside, laughter came easier. Eli had taken to the land like he'd always been part of it. He fed the hens without being asked, remembered to shut the barn doors when the wind picked up, and learned how to carry firewood without spilling it twice. He still didn't talk much in town, but with Maddie, the words were starting to come. One morning, over breakfast, he pushed his bowl aside and said plainly, I want to stay. She didn't look up right away. She just stirred the coffee slowly, heart skipping a beat. You've been staying, she said. No, he said. I want to. Not just because I have nowhere else. I want this. She met his gaze. It's not always easy. You'll grow up out here, and you'll be different from the other boys. Maybe lonelier, maybe stronger. Folks might not understand. But this land, it doesn't lie. It'll teach you who you are, if you let it. I know, he said. Then, more quietly, you don't have to be scared to keep me. And just like that, her breath caught in her throat. She reached for his hand. I'm not scared of keeping you, she said. I'm scared I won't do it right. He smiled, that quiet, crooked smile that was all Coulter in its softness. I think we'll be okay. Later that week, Luke Carver rode in again. He brought with him papers from the state guardianship forms. Signatures, the legal things Maddie had tried not to think too much about. He stayed only a night, then prepared to leave at dawn. Eli walked him to his horse, locket around his neck, harmonica in his pocket, Coulter's journal under his arm. Luke crouched and looked him in the eye. You sure this is where you belong? Eli nodded. I've got work to do. Luke raised an eyebrow. Work? Eli looked toward the cabin, where Maddie stood on the porch holding 2 mugs, steam curling into the cool morning air. She kept a fire going for someone who never came home, he said. Now, it's my turn. Luke stood, hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. Well, I reckon your uncle would have liked that. He mounted up and tipped his hat. You ride steady, Eli Grady. Then he was gone. That evening, Maddie and Eli stood together on the ridge behind the cabin, where a small wooden cross now stood beside the stones Coulter had once rested beneath. They didn't say much, just listened to the wind and the creek below, and watched as the last light slipped behind the hills. Eli turned to her. Do you think he knows? She nodded, one hand resting on his shoulder. I think he always did. Then she reached into her coat and handed him something wrapped in linen. It was the old locket. I think it belongs with you now, she said. Eli opened it slowly. Inside was the sketch of Matt, a faded, delicate hand next to it. A newer one, rougher, done in charcoal. A boy with sharp eyes and a half smile, sitting in a rocking chair with a rooster at his feet. He looked up at her, eyes shining. Who drew this? I did, she said. Long time ago, before I knew what you meant to me. He didn't say anything. He just took her hand, and together, they stood there, not mourning what was lost, but thankful for what stayed. The cabin would creak and groan with time. The hat would wear thin. The journal's ink would fade. But the fire, that would never go out. Some stories don't end with farewells, they end with belonging. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not that someone came back, but that someone stayed. What did this story leave behind in you? Did a moment stay with you longer than you expected? Share your thoughts in the comment side. Love to hear what part of your heart it reached. And if this story meant something to you, stick around. There are more fires to light, more quiet miracles to tell.